Night had fallen. In one of New York's outer boroughs, inside a stone house, two people, worn down by the years, sat across from each other. Richard and Angela, both in their 50s, married for decades. Richard was a typical white American man, raised in a conservative family, having spent years working in construction. Angela, a strong Black American woman, worked at a law firm and had always known how to stand up for her rights. They came from different worlds, but once upon a time, love had made those differences seem insignificant. But now, things had changed. "You don't listen to me anymore, Richard." Angela set her coffee cup down with a thud. Richard let out a deep sigh, shaking his head. "For God's sake, Angela, I always listen to you. You just have to stop seeing everything in black and white. Life isn't that simple." Angela narrowed her eyes. "Black and white? Really? Is that where we're going with this again?" Richard furrowed his brows. "Look, you know this country is divided, but we don't have to be part of that." Angela stood up. "Easy for you to say, because you've never had to live a single day as me." Silence filled the room. Richard didn't know what to say. He loved Angela, but Angela didn't want him to just love her. She wanted him to understand that sometimes love wasn't enough. "What do you want, Angela? Just tell me. What do you want me to do?" Angela tried to hold back her tears, but her voice trembled. "I want you to truly understand me, Richard. Living with me isn't enough. You need to see my world. Feel what I feel." Richard ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. This marriage, this life, it was supposed to be easier, but love had never been easy. Angela walked toward the door, pausing for a moment. "You know, Richard, sometimes loving someone doesn't just mean being in the same room as them. It means fighting their battles with them." Richard wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat. The door closed, and the night left behind nothing but silence. But sometimes, the greatest storms begin in silence. The door slammed shut. Richard heard Angela's footsteps. She rushed down the stairs, grabbed her coat, and walked out the front door. By the time he followed, she was already in her car. The engine roared, and within seconds, the black SUV disappeared into the night. Richard inhaled the cold air. He crossed his arms, closing his eyes for a moment. These arguments had become more frequent. 25 years ago, they had married against all odds. Their interracial relationship had been a big deal for society, but not for them. Back then, they truly believed love could conquer all. But love wasn't always enough. Richard walked back inside. His eyes wandered over the framed pictures in the living room, wedding photos, vacation snapshots, candid moments with their children. This house had once been filled with laughter. Now, all that remained was silence. He went into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. Pouring himself a glass, he leaned against the window, staring out into the darkness. Where had Angela gone? Her mother's house? Her sister's? Or was she just driving around trying to clear her head? Hours passed. It was well past midnight, and Angela still wasn't home. Richard picked up his phone and sent a message. "Angela, where are you? We need to talk. Please come home." No response. A few minutes later, he sent another, "I'm sorry, call me." 2:14 a.m., still nothing. Richard was frustrated, but more than that, he was worried. He grabbed his phone again, scrolling through his contacts, and finally tapped his daughter Jasmine's number. After a few rings, a sleepy voice answered. "Dad, do you know what time it is?" "I know, sweetheart, but is your mom with you?" Jasmine instantly sounded more awake. "Number Y, what happened?" Richard hesitated. "We argued. She left. She hasn't come back." Jasmine sighed. "Dad, how many times have we talked about this? Mom wouldn't just leave over one fight, but you know she's been feeling alone, right?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mom spent years fitting into your world, but did you ever try to fit into hers?" Richard fell silent. He knew what she was getting at. Angela had always blended into his circle of friends. His family, his work events, his lifestyle. But had he ever truly stepped into her world? Had he visited her old neighborhood? Had he listened, really listened, to her experiences with racism and the struggles she faced? This was the real issue. "Dad, maybe this time you should go to her, find her, listen to her." Richard thought for a moment. There was only one place she would go. A late night encounter. At 3 a.m., Richard got into his car and drove through the dark, heading toward the city. He knew exactly where to look: Angela's childhood neighborhood. As he pulled up near an old park, he spotted her car parked on the curb. Inside the park, she sat alone on a bench, staring at her phone. The glow of the screen reflected off her face. Richard walked over slowly. Angela was holding an old photograph in her hands. "Angela," he called softly. She looked up, sighed, then rolled her eyes. "What do you want, Richard?" He sat down beside her. "You." Angela let out a short, bitter laugh. "If you want me, then you need to actually understand me." Richard nodded. "Then tell me. This time, I'm really listening." Angela took a deep breath and gazed up at the sky. And at that moment, she finally began to tell the story she had been holding inside for years. This story highlights the challenges of bringing together people from different backgrounds and how a lack of communication in relationships can create deep wounds. Some important lessons we can take from it are: 1. Love alone is not enough. Richard and Angela may love each other, but that's not enough to solve their problems. A real relationship requires mutual understanding and empathy. Love can only last if there's a strong foundation to build upon. 2. Empathy is more than just understanding. Richard may be trying to understand Angela's feelings, but without experiencing her struggles firsthand, he can never fully grasp them. As Angela points out, just being present isn't enough. You have to truly see the other person's world and be willing to share in their struggles. 3. Talking isn't enough. Listening is key. Like in most arguments, the real issue here is a lack of communication. Richard is trying to explain his side, but what Angela truly needs is to be heard and understood. Being a good listener isn't just about hearing words, it's about understanding the emotions and meaning behind them. 4. Differences shouldn't lead to separation. Angela and Richard come from different racial and cultural backgrounds. In the beginning, their love overshadowed those differences, but over time, they became obstacles. What truly matters in a relationship is how a couple navigates their differences. If they don't put in the effort to understand each other, even the deepest love can fade. 5. Silence can be the most powerful response. The story ends in silence, but that silence carries a storm within it. Sometimes, even the sharpest words aren't as powerful as silence. Angela walking away isn't just an ending, it's a statement. For Richard, it could be a turning point, or the beginning of the end. Final takeaway: this story emphasizes the importance of understanding, empathy, and true connection in relationships. It also shows that when people share their world with someone, they expect that person to step into it with them. Because sometimes, truly loving someone means being willing to face their battles too.